The glass coffee cup slipped from Elena Brooks's hand just as she reached the entrance of Brookside Station. It shattered across the pavement, sending dark coffee between the shoes of hurried commuters. Several people stepped around the broken glass without slowing down, and no one looked at her long enough to ask whether she had burned her hand. Elena quietly picked up the empty paper sleeve, dropped it into a nearby bin, and hurried inside before the station clock stole another minute from her morning. The departure board flashed a line of delays across the screen, and hundreds of passengers crowded the platform waiting for the next train. Jackets brushed against strangers, briefcases knocked softly into shopping bags, and tired faces reflected the same silent routine that filled the station every weekday. Everyone appeared close to one another, yet the distance between them felt much greater than the few inches separating their shoulders. Elena found a place near one of the platform columns and opened the presentation she planned to deliver later that morning. She worked for an architectural design company where deadlines rarely changed, even when trains did. Her manager expected every meeting to begin exactly on time, and Elena had slowly learned to organize her entire life around clocks, calendars, and reminders. She often wondered when she had last walked through the city without checking the time every few minutes. A loud thud interrupted her thoughts. An elderly street bookseller had lost his balance while carrying 2 heavy boxes filled with second-hand novels. One box struck the ground, and dozens of books slid across the platform. Their pages fluttered beneath the movement of passing passengers, while the old man struggled to kneel beside them. He reached for one book after another, apologizing quietly to people who never answered. Elena looked up instinctively. Her train was approaching. She looked at the books again. Then she looked at the digital clock. For a brief moment she considered crossing the platform to help, but another announcement echoed through the station. Service now arriving. The crowd immediately pressed toward the yellow safety line. Elena remained exactly where she was. Someone standing much closer would surely help him. That single thought felt reasonable enough to silence every other voice inside her mind. The train doors opened, and the passengers moved forward together. As Elena stepped inside, she glanced through the window one last time. The bookseller was still alone, gathering worn novels from the cold concrete, while hundreds of people flowed around him like water moving around a stone. The train pulled away before she could see whether anyone had finally stopped. People often make decisions without realizing that they are making them. In everyday English, the verb to assume means believing something is true without checking the facts first. Elena assumed another stranger would help, and that quiet assumption became the reason she never stepped onto the platform again. 40 minutes later, she entered the bright offices of Northbridge Design. The reception area overlooked the river, and morning sunlight reflected across rows of glass meeting rooms. Architects discussed blueprints, engineers compared measurements, and project managers hurried between desks carrying folders that seemed to grow heavier every hour. Emma Collins noticed Elena almost immediately. "You've been running since you walked through the door." Elena smiled faintly while removing her coat. "I think the whole city has been running." Emma laughed before handing her a folder. "Then let's try to finish before the city catches us." Unlike most people in the office, Emma never appeared rushed. She worked with quiet focus, listened carefully before speaking, and treated every conversation as though the person in front of her deserved her full attention. Her calm attitude often settled the room long before difficult meetings began. Confidence is not the loud voice that speaks over everyone else. True confidence often appears in calm decisions made under pressure. Emma rarely raised her voice, yet people trusted her because she remained steady when others became anxious. The client presentation ended better than Elena expected. Several proposed designs received approval, and the meeting finished ahead of schedule. As employees drifted toward nearby cafes for lunch, Emma suggested walking through Hawthorne Square instead of eating inside the office. Fresh air sounded better than another hour beneath fluorescent lights. The square was alive with music, conversations, and the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Office workers filled the benches while children chased pigeons around an old stone fountain. Elena finally relaxed enough to stop thinking about deadlines. Then a frightened voice cut through the afternoon noise. A small girl stood near the fountain, turning in circles while searching the crowd with frightened eyes. She called for her mother once. Then again, the second call sounded much smaller than the first. People noticed. Several slowed their pace. Nobody approached her. Elena instinctively looked around, expecting someone else to kneel beside the child. A security guard stood almost 50 meters away. A shopkeeper watched from his doorway. Parents pulled their own children a little closer before continuing their conversations. Emma had already started walking. She did not say anything. She simply crossed the square and knelt until she was level with the little girl. The child stopped crying almost immediately. Emma spoke softly, pointing toward the information desk while keeping the girl calm. Within moments, a florist left her stall. A university student offered to search the nearby paths, and another woman informed security that a child had become separated from her family. Elena watched everything unfold from the cafe terrace. The remarkable part was not that Emma had helped first. It was what happened after she moved. People who had remained uncertain only seconds earlier suddenly found something useful to do. A worried father appeared less than 4 minutes later, running across the square with panic written across his face. He embraced his daughter so tightly that she laughed through her tears. Around them, the strangers quietly returned to their ordinary lives, as though nothing unusual had happened. Emma sat down opposite Elena a few minutes later. Neither woman spoke immediately. Finally, Elena asked, "How did everyone know what to do?" Emma looked toward the fountain before answering. "I don't think they knew," she said. "I think they were waiting for someone to begin." Those words followed Elena long after lunch ended. She did not realize it then, but before the sun disappeared behind the city skyline, she would face a moment when nobody else would begin, and this time, the decision would belong entirely to her. Before I share the rest of the story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. The afternoon passed, but Elena found herself reading the same paragraph of a project report 3 times without understanding a single sentence. Every few minutes, her thoughts drifted back to Hawthorne Square. She could still picture the frightened little girl standing beside the fountain and the way the entire crowd had changed only after Emma took the first step. Nothing about the situation had been complicated, yet almost everyone had waited for someone else to act. When the office closed for the day, Emma packed her bag and smiled. "Walking to the station again?" "I think so," Elena replied. Emma nodded. "It helps clear your head." After saying goodbye, they followed different streets toward home. Elena chose the longer route along the river because the evening air felt cooler there, and the gentle sound of flowing water usually helped her think. Office workers filled the sidewalks, cyclists crossed the bridges, and cafes slowly replaced business meetings with conversations and laughter. She had walked only a few blocks when she noticed a young volunteer standing beside a folding table covered with blankets and bottled water. A handwritten sign explained that the supplies would be delivered to families whose homes had recently been damaged by flooding in a nearby town. Several people stopped to read the sign. Most offered polite smiles before continuing on their way. "I'll donate next time," one man promised. A woman apologized because she was in a hurry. Another person quietly avoided eye contact altogether. The volunteer thanked every passerby anyway. Generosity is an interesting English word because it does not always describe giving money. Sometimes, generosity means offering your time, your attention, or even a few encouraging words. Those gifts often cost nothing, yet they can carry remarkable value. Elena slowed her pace. She almost reached for her wallet. Instead, she told herself she would return the following weekend when she had more time. As she continued walking, an uncomfortable realization settled into her thoughts. She had said almost the same thing that morning. "Someone else will help. I'll do it later." Both sentences sounded reasonable. Both made walking away feel easier. The evening traffic became heavier as she reached Ashford Avenue, one of the busiest streets in the city. Delivery vans occupied the loading zones, buses stopped every few minutes, and impatient drivers pressed their horns whenever the lights remained red for more than a few seconds. Just outside a neighborhood pharmacy, a sharp voice rose above the noise. "Please, somebody help!" Elena turned immediately. A young woman was trying to support an elderly gentleman whose knees had suddenly given way beneath him. One arm wrapped around his shoulders while the other struggled to keep his walking stick from falling into the street. His breathing had become shallow, and the color had almost disappeared from his face. People noticed. They slowed down. Several whispered to each other. Nobody moved closer. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken. She looked from one stranger to another, waiting for somebody with medical experience to step forward. A delivery driver remained inside his van. Two office workers paused only long enough to exchange uncertain glances. A jogger removed one earbud, watched for a few seconds, and continued running. The same invisible wall that had separated everyone at the station seemed to appear once again. Fear often disguises itself as hesitation. People worry about making a mistake, saying the wrong thing, or becoming responsible for a situation they do not fully understand. In everyday English, the adjective hesitant describes exactly that feeling. A hesitant person is not always unwilling to help. Sometimes they are simply afraid of acting incorrectly. Elena's feet refused to move. For one painful moment, she felt exactly as she had that morning. Then she remembered the bookseller. She remembered the little girl. More importantly, she remembered that both situations had changed because one person chose to act before anyone else. She took a slow breath and crossed the pavement. "I don't know much about first aid," she admitted to the young woman, "but I'm staying with you." Relief immediately softened the woman's frightened expression. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do. We'll figure it out together." Elena pulled out her phone and called the emergency operator. The calm voice on the other end asked for the exact location, the man's age, whether he remained conscious, and whether he could still respond to simple questions. Elena answered carefully, while repeating every instruction to the young woman. When the call ended, she turned toward the growing crowd. "Has anyone here received first aid training?" For several seconds, nobody answered. Then a middle-aged man raised his hand. "I'm a dentist. Can you help us until the ambulance arrives?" He stepped forward immediately. A pharmacist hurried outside carrying a folded blanket. A taxi driver redirected curious pedestrians so the paramedics would have enough room. Someone offered a bottle of water, but the pharmacist gently explained why they should wait until medical professionals examined the patient first. The atmosphere changed almost instantly. Instead of standing silently around the emergency, people began asking useful questions. Who could guide the ambulance? Who would move the traffic cones? Who could comfort the frightened granddaughter? One action inspired another. The English verb encourage means to give someone confidence or support so they feel able to act. Encouragement is powerful because people often discover courage they did not realize they already possessed. Elena had not given orders. She had simply become the first person willing to begin. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Two paramedics quickly examined the elderly man before lifting him onto a stretcher. "Who called us?" one of them asked. "I did," Elena answered. The paramedic nodded appreciatively. "You gave us clear information. That saved valuable time." The words lingered in Elena's mind. She had not performed a dramatic rescue. She had not possessed expert knowledge. She had simply refused to wait. Before climbing into the ambulance, the young woman hurried back toward Elena. "My name is Sophie. I'm Elena." Sophie struggled to smile through her tears. "That's my grandfather, Daniel. I hope he'll recover quickly." "So do I." Sophie hesitated before speaking again. "When I shouted for help, I honestly believed everyone had decided to ignore us." Elena glanced toward the strangers still standing nearby. "They didn't ignore you forever." Sophie followed her eyes. "No," she said quietly. "They were waiting." The ambulance doors closed, and the flashing blue lights disappeared into the evening traffic. Gradually, the crowd dissolved. The pharmacist returned inside. The taxi driver welcomed another passenger. The dentist continued walking home. Within only a few minutes, the street looked exactly as it had before. Yet Elena no longer saw it the same way. She understood that cities were not cold because people lacked compassion. Sometimes they were simply filled with ordinary people waiting for permission to care. As she continued toward the station, Emma's words returned one last time. "I think they were waiting for someone to begin." For the first time that day, Elena smiled, not because everything had ended perfectly, but because she finally understood what those words truly meant. She had stopped waiting for someone else. Without realizing it, she had become the person others were waiting for. Monday arrived with bright skies and a gentle breeze that carried the fresh smell of rain through the open streets. Elena reached the office earlier than usual, not because she had another important meeting, but because she wanted a quiet hour before the phones started ringing. She placed her bag beside her desk, switched on her computer, and was about to answer her first email when the receptionist appeared with a curious smile. "Someone is here to see you," she said. Elena looked up in surprise because she was not expecting any visitors. "For me?" The receptionist nodded before stepping aside. Sophie stood near the entrance, holding a small paper bag with both hands. Her face looked much more relaxed than it had outside the pharmacy, and for the first time, Elena noticed that she could not have been much older than 25. She smiled warmly before walking across the office. "I hope I'm not disturbing your work," Sophie said. "Not at all," Elena replied. "How is your grandfather?" Sophie smiled with visible relief. "He's much better. The doctors expect him to recover completely, but they told us something that my grandfather can't stop talking about." Elena looked at her with quiet curiosity. "They said someone called for help at exactly the right time." If the ambulance had arrived much later, things could have been very different. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Relief is a useful English word because it describes the peaceful feeling that arrives after fear has finally passed. It is the moment when your body slowly relaxes because the danger is no longer in front of you. Sophie carried that feeling in every smile she shared. She handed the paper bag to Elena. "My grandfather insisted that I bring this." Inside the bag was a small notebook with a dark blue cover. It looked old but carefully protected, as though someone had treasured it for many years. A folded letter rested between the first pages. Elena opened the note slowly. "Dear Elena, many people believe that courage belongs only to heroes. I disagree. I think courage often belongs to ordinary people who decide not to walk away. Thank you for reminding me that this city still has people like that. With gratitude, Daniel Carter." Elena read the letter twice before carefully folding it again. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Sophie replied. "He only wanted you to know that you changed more than one day. You gave my family hope." Before leaving, Sophie paused beside the office door. "My grandfather asked me to invite you for tea one day." Elena smiled. "I'd like that." The rest of the morning passed quickly, but Daniel's letter remained in her thoughts. She placed it inside the top drawer of her desk instead of her bag because she wanted to keep it somewhere safe. Every time she opened the drawer, the folded paper reminded her that a decision lasting only a few minutes could remain important to another person for years. That afternoon, Emma noticed Elena looking unusually cheerful. "Good news? The best kind." Elena told her everything, from Sophie's visit to the handwritten letter. Emma listened quietly before smiling. "I'm glad you met them." "So am I." They continued walking toward a nearby cafe after work, choosing the quieter streets instead of the busy shopping district. Autumn had begun painting the trees with shades of gold and deep orange, and the cool air encouraged people to slow their pace instead of rushing from one place to another. After a few minutes, Elena looked at Emma. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. You always seem to know exactly when someone needs help." "Have you always been like that?" Emma thought carefully before answering. "My mother volunteered at a community center when I was growing up. Every Saturday she took me with her." "What did you do there?" "We packed food boxes, visited elderly neighbors, and organized children's activities. I was too young to understand why it mattered." "What changed?" Emma smiled gently. "My mother used to tell me something I didn't appreciate until I became older." "What was it?" "She always said that kindness spreads in the same way fear does. When one person panics, others often panic too. When one person stays calm and steps forward, others usually find the courage to follow." Elena remained silent. Those words explained something she had witnessed several times during the past week. No one had been waiting for permission. They had been waiting for an example. Understanding is another useful English word because it describes more than simply knowing a fact. True understanding arrives when different experiences suddenly connect and begin making sense together. Elena realized she had not merely helped an elderly stranger, she had discovered something about human nature that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Several weeks passed. Life became busy again, yet Elena noticed that small choices had quietly changed her daily routine. She smiled at the security guard every morning because she had finally learned his name was Michael. She thanked the train conductor who greeted passengers each day. She offered her seat to tired travelers without wondering whether someone else should do it instead. None of these moments felt extraordinary. Together, they transformed ordinary days into something warmer. One cold Friday evening, Elena left work later than expected. Rain had covered the streets, and the station platforms were crowded with commuters hoping to get home before the weather became worse. As she stepped through the entrance, a familiar sound echoed across the platform. Books. Dozens of books. They slid across the floor after a young university student accidentally dropped a heavy box while hurrying toward the train. For a brief second, everything looked exactly like the morning that had started this journey. Passengers looked. They hesitated. Several quietly walked around the scattered books. Elena did not think. She moved. She reached the nearest books before they slid toward the platform edge and began stacking them carefully inside the damaged box. A businessman stopped beside her. "Here, let me help." An elderly woman collected several novels that had slipped beneath a bench. Two teenagers retrieved the remaining books before the arriving passengers reached them. Within less than a minute, every book had been gathered. The student looked around in complete surprise. "I thought I was going to lose all of them." Elena smiled while handing him the final novel. "It looks like you weren't alone." As the train doors opened, everyone quietly continued their journeys. No speeches were made, no photographs were taken. No one expected applause. Yet something important had happened. Months earlier, Elena would probably have looked around, hoping another stranger would solve the problem. Now she understood that every crowd begins with individuals. Communities are not created by large moments that appear once in a lifetime. They grow through ordinary decisions repeated again and again until helping becomes a habit rather than an exception. Outside the train window, thousands of lights stretched across the evening skyline. Every building held people carrying invisible worries, private dreams, and difficult days that nobody else could fully understand. Elena knew she could never solve every problem she encountered, and she no longer expected herself to. She had learned something far more realistic. No one is responsible for saving the whole world. Everyone is responsible for the moment standing directly in front of them. As the train disappeared into the night, Elena watched the reflection in the window and smiled quietly. The city had not changed. The streets were still crowded. People were still busy. Deadlines still existed. The difference was much smaller than that. One ordinary person had stopped waiting for someone else to begin. Sometimes, that is exactly where every meaningful change starts. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.